They talking shit about I, who will win and why. I'm alive, just took one to revive. Keep that vibe when we show up and collide.
On the evening of April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was shot, the informant had been on a shopping trip with Reverend James Bevel. The informant said he returned to the Lorraine Motel at approximately 5 p.m. and was standing in the motel courtyard at the time Dr. King was shot. The informant said he returned to the Lorraine Motel at approximately 5 p.m. King was shot like at 6, I think they said. He is positive that the shot that killed Dr. King came from the rear of the building on South Main Street. So MPD surveillance detail and removal of Detective Reddick from duty. From the time of Dr. King's return to Memphis on April 3rd until his assassination, he was under physical surveillance by the MPD. Upon learning of Dr. King's flight schedule, Inspector G.P. Tynes and the MPD Inspectional Bureau instructed two black plainclothes officers, look like us, but they not us, Detective Edward Reddick and Patrolman Willie B. Richmond, to go to the airport to observe the arrival of Dr. King, him under continuous surveillance. The surveillance was ordered because Dr. King was a controversial figure and he met with local black militants of his on his prior visit. So they wanted to go ahead and trail him and tell him because of his quote unquote meetings on his prior visit with these militant groups. And you do see that he did have physical surveillance, and who was surveilling at the time that Dr. King was on that balcony. The 4 men commanded by Inspector Don H. Smith to go to the airport for the purpose of providing security for Dr. King. While waiting for Dr. King to arrive, Mrs. Thomas Matthews advised Lieutenant George K. Davis that she had come to the airport to pick up Dr. King and that no one had asked for police to be assigned to him. Inspector Smith also asked Reverend James Lawson where they were going when they left the airport, and he replied, "We have not fully made up our minds." Nevertheless, when Dr. King and his party left the airport, Inspector Smith and his men followed them to the Lorraine Motel, arriving approximately at 11:20 a.m. They left at 12:05, followed by the security detail to the church, that Methodist church that we were talking about. So they got all of this. Tynes stated in his reports that he was not conferred with and has no idea of why the security detail was removed from Dr. King at 5:05 p.m. It's a little strange. Now they just want to remove it all of a sudden. They said, he not meeting with the militant group anymore. Back out of there. Get out of there. Stand down. In a separate activity from the security detail, Detective Reddick and Richmond went to the airport on April 3rd to observe Dr. King's arrival. So this looks like another group of, I think they were the second people that were following. When Dr. King left the airport, they followed him to the Lorraine Motel and learned that he was registered in room 306. So they knew what room he was in and everything. So at 12:05, Reddick and Richmond, these are the detectives that's following him and telling him with surveillance, followed Dr. King and his party to the Centenary Methodist Church, where a closed meeting of approximately 30 black ministers was scheduled. Reddick again called headquarters and advised his superiors of his location. Reddick was instructed to leave Richmond at the church and for him to return to the area of the Lorraine Motel for the purpose of finding a suitable place where the close surveillance could be kept on the motel. Richmond remained at the church until the meeting was over at approximately 2:15 p.m. Richmond then went to Clayton Temple, where he thought Dr. King would address the sanitation workers prior to the scheduled 3 p.m. march. However, Dr. King did not make an appearance there. Richmond telephone headquarters at about 3:30 and was advised that Dr. King had returned to the motel and that Reddick had set up surveillance posts at fire station number 2, located at South Main and Butler Streets. Richmond immediately left Clayton Temple and joined Reddick at the fire station. So they got a fire station right beside the Lorraine Hotel. They got a whole fire station right there. Also, with these 2 men hiding out in the fire station, some of the worst surveillance, I would say, in the history of spying or espionage, because it was none being conducted at the time of the shooting. Interesting. Okay. So the rear of the fire station number 2 overlooks the Lorraine Motel and provided an excellent vantage point where Reddit and Richmond could observe Dr. King on his associates that entered and left the motel. On April 3rd, 1968, Reddit and Richmond remained on the observation post until 6:35 p.m., in which time they were relieved by Lieutenant E.H. Arkin and Popala of the MPD Internal Security Bureau. They got 24-hour round the clock surveillance. These guys are being relieved for other guys coming in. Okay. After leaving the observation post, these guys didn't quit. Reddit and Richmond went to the Mason Temple, where Dr. King was scheduled to address a mass meeting. Shortly after they arrived at the temple, Reddit was approached by Reverend Malcolm D. Blackburn and told that the word was out that he was over in the fire station near the Lorraine Motel, spying with binoculars. Reverend Blackburn also advised Richmond that the temple was the wrong place for him to be because of the tension was being so high. Fearing that he would be exposed, Reddit and Richmond left the meeting approximately at 8:50 p.m. So these guys, this reverend came out, told them that we know y'all at the fire station spying on our boy with the binoculars. At approximately 12:50 p.m., Reddit received a threatening telephone call from a female who stated that he was doing the black people wrong and they were going to do him wrong. At approximately 4 p.m., Reddit was ordered by the telephone to leave the fire station. Remember, this 4 p.m. King was shot at like 6 p.m. He was ordered by telephone to leave the fire station and report to headquarters, where he was advised that threats had been made on his life. He was therefore ordered to move his family into a motel under an assumed name Franklin Holloman, former director of police and fire of Memphis, Tennessee. Reddit was taken home in a squad car, but refused to move his family because of a sick relative. At about the time the squad car arrived in front of Reddit's residence. So let me get this right. Dr. King, historically known to be nonviolent, and these guys are worried at the police station that Reddit is going to be unalived while watching someone who's nonviolent across the street from the motel that he's living at. I don't know, man. Maybe somebody else out there, maybe y'all out there, y'all might disagree. It just don't make no sense. That's like having surveillance on like Gandhi or something. And then your chief call you and say, hey, man, you know what I'm saying? You're getting a lot of attempts and threats on your life. I need you to move from the post and no more surveillance. It just don't make sense to me, man. It makes sense, man. At about the time the squad car arrived in front of Reddit's residence, it was announced on the radio that Dr. King had been shot. After a couple of days, Reddit did not hear any more about the threat on his life. And that was said in an interview, July 8th, 1976. Never heard anything else again about a threat on his life, even after Dr. King was killed. So if I'm someone that's furious that this police detective is just watching King, and then Dr. King just so happened to get unalive, if I'm that mad at that man watching him, wouldn't I think that man is the person that unalived him? If I'm the person threatening his life because I know he at the fire station, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors here, and that's one of the perfect strategies in the art of war. Smoke and mirrors. Use them and use them well. That's how they get over. I mean, that's how they get away with a lot of stuff, is they use these smoke and mirrors. So I'm skipping down to page 32. It says, although Reddit was relieved from duty at the fire station number 2, remember his buddy Richmond remained there and continued to observe who entered and left the motel. At approximately 6 p.m., Richmond saw Dr. King leave his room and walk to the handrail on the balcony. Reverend Billy Cowles was standing off to Dr. King's right, and instant later, Richmond heard a loud sound similar to a shot. Watched Dr. King fall back from the handrail and put his hand up to his head. At approximately 6:01 p.m., Richmond telephoned headquarters and reported that Dr. King had been shot. So it sounds like these guys, look at that, 6 o'clock on the dot, not 6:13, not 6:15. What's the chances of somebody being shot of his magnitude on something that's already, this is premeditated, this is orchestrated, because whoever fired the shot had to get in place. They had to lay low for a while. They had to, have all this information. And just so happened 6 p.m. was the time that the bullet was fired.